In a world dominated by visuals, how many times do we pause to appreciate the beauty of sound uninterrupted by noise? Are we even aware of the beauty of sound, or do we take it for granted?
I had no idea that Bose was an Indian.
I thought that Bose was a German name.
I had no idea Bose was a surname.
I had no idea it was built by an Indian.
I didn't know Bose was an Indian name.
I think Amar thought of himself as definitely from an Indian heritage.
I grew up in West Bengal, India. I always knew that there is this company which makes really good sound systems, really good speakers called Bose, because my friends aspired to buy a Bose, but I always knew that it's a Bengali surname, so whosoever is the founder of the company has to be a Bengali. But that is all I knew. I did not even know the first name of Dr. Amar Gopal Bose. The more I searched, the more I realized there is very little information out there. When I looked at Dr. Bose's life in itself, I learned that his father, Mr. Noni Gopal Bose, migrated from India back when India was not an independent nation, it was a British colony. And Noni Gopal Bose fled because he was very active in the Indian freedom movement, and the British started imprisoning them, and he landed in the Ellis Island in 1920. And that is exactly the time when my mother's father was also one of the student activists, and he was actually put in jail. He spent around 6 months in jail, and I could identify with this story. After a couple of weeks of rigorous searching and trying to get in touch with who might have a complete story, I randomly reached MIT's Bose Fellowship website, and I sent an email to bosegrants@mit.edu and hoped whosoever was out there would reach out to me. I said that I'm a Bengali academic filmmaker and I'm really interested in making a biographical film about Dr. Amar Bose. And that's when Dr. Alan Oppenheim, Dr. Bose's first doctoral student, emailed me back and put me in touch with authors and Bose archivists Flo and Jim, who met Dr. Bose while researching their book Dark Hero, a biography of Norbert Wiener, Dr. Bose's doctoral advisor.
With Norbert Wiener, we go to the MIT archives.
43 cartons of documents, 2 academic biographies, Wiener's own autobiographies, 2 volumes, 600 pages. And we say, well, what is there here on Dr. Bose? There was nothing. There was a couple of papers he published around the time of the beginning of Bose Corporation. And then we started talking to Ursula and to Vanu and to Ken, and we learned across the board, Amar Bose was a very, very private person. Nobody knew much about Amar Bose. There were even young employees at Bose Corporation a year after Amar Bose died who didn't know anything about the man.
I think a good question for you is, why was he so private? You could speculate that, he was somebody who was naturally shy or something. I don't think that's true. You could speculate and say deep insecurity about his skin color or his heritage as an Indian and a Bengali. I don't think so at all. The best I can do is privacy was a philosophical choice to not distract from and get in the way of either his own pursuit of the work or in any way distracting from, interfering from somebody else's interest in the work.
Therefore, like Buddha's group of blind men trying to describe an elephant, I began my journey towards finding the man behind the achievements. Dr. Amar Bose, an engineer, a teacher, an entrepreneur. While I asked myself, was he an Indian? Was he an American? Who was he? And the story starts with his father. Noni Gopal Bose grew up in colonial India. He was born in Jessore, now Bangladesh, where he finished high school and later moved to the then capital of India, Kolkata. a hotbed of Indian freedom movement. Growing up an athlete under the oppression of British government, Noni got involved in student politics. And right before he came under British prosecution, he fled. He boarded a ship. As the legend goes, he took the wrong ship. While he wanted to join the armed struggles in Japan led by Rashbihari Bose, after a series of events, he landed in Ellis Island, New York. Upon arriving in the United States of America, Noni joined Dr. Taraknath Das, a very prominent figure of Indian freedom movement in the US. The freedom movement in US was called Gadar movement, which literally means revolt. Together, they would raise awareness, raise funds, and they would organize lectures in and around DC, New York, Philadelphia. Together, they started raising money to fund an armed revolt in India to overthrow the British government. Deeply rooted in Eastern philosophy, Noni got involved in Vedic lectures. After one such lecture, Swami Yagananda told Noni to take a look at Charlotte, then a stranger, and said, I want you to take a good look at her because one day she will be your wife. Charlotte was a school teacher of French-German ancestry. Noni and Charlotte got married and settled in Philadelphia.
I was born in Philadelphia in 1929, and that was a very special year because that was the huge stock market crash. So I am told my parents had to borrow $75 to get me out of the hospital because whatever earnings my parents had accumulated were held in stocks.
Noni Gopal Bose had an import business where he sold goods from India. When the store faced hardship during Second World War, Amar, then a teenager, started repairing radios in the basement of their house. Later, the radio business became so popular in Philadelphia that when Amar was waitlisted by the MIT admissions office, an alumnus wrote to them informing about the radio business, and Amar was admitted to MIT in 1947. Coincidentally, the year when India got its independence from the British. When Amar was a teenager, his father was always very sure that Amar would go to MIT. But his high school counselor told Amar that he would never go to MIT because of his race.
His father had an assistant, Gloria Prince. She would take him every week to the Philadelphia Art Museum, and they would listen to the Philadelphia Civic Symphony. And that's where he first began to love Western classical music. At home, his father would play the music of Tagore and Bengali music, and he learned both the East and the West music and cultural traditions. The 50s was the golden age of hi-fi. Stereophonic records, high-fidelity recordings first started to come out. At MIT, all the young engineering students were building their own homebrewed hi-fis. You'd walk down the hall at some of the dorms and rooming houses, and you'd hear sound blaring and pitch volume out of all the different students' rooms. And Amar Bose was the first one who said, let's do this. Let's bring some science to this.
When I graduated from MIT with a master's and bachelor's degree in 52, then I decided to go on for the doctorate, and I spent a summer working for Philips in Holland. And I arrived at my office, and there was a note on the desk. It said, please see the director of the laboratory, research laboratory of electronics. He was then Dr. Jerome Wiesner. He said to me that they believed that Professor Norbert Wiener, who was this world-famous mathematician, but in our math department, I was in electrical engineering, had some theories in mathematics that had applications in physics and in electrical engineering in particular. And they wanted me to do a thesis for him, and I was appalled, and then they kept saying, no, but we want you to do this. And finally, I was getting a bit annoyed as a 23-year-old mite, and I said, look, are you drafting me? And they said, yes. Little did I realize that it was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
Amar was very charismatic. When Amar Bose walked into a room, you knew that somebody important had walked into the room. So when he walked into a classroom, just his presence emanated something very, very special. And so the students just naturally developed a respect for him. He showed his respect for them.
And I'd reached a point where I wanted to get on with my life. One more class couldn't possibly make a difference. And within 10 minutes of the first lecture of Dr. Bose's class, I knew my life was about to take a very different path.
I'd never before in engineering seen someone tie together mechanical engineering and electrical engineering and thermal engineering and acoustical engineering and very clearly draw the line through all of them, saying, we all think about these problems in the same way.
Dr. Bose was very upset because the class average was poor. And I remember him coming in saying, this is more on me than it is on you, because many of you are working very hard. And so you can't blame all of the students, you have to blame the teacher. So he got like even better as a teacher, shaking like a leaf. You know, I approached him after class and I said, would you ever be available to help me with the next step after I graduate? And he said, what are you doing for lunch?
MIT's motto is mind and hand. And no one exhibits that quintessential MIT character more beautifully than Dr. Bose. A wonderful, ambitious idea is only a wonderful, ambitious idea unless you can use your hands to make it a material reality.
I was the first employee of my professor. I was writing a master's thesis for Dr. Amar Bose, and one day he came up to me and he said, you know, some of the work that we've been doing research on, it looks like it could be really practical. And I said, yeah, that's probably true. And then about a week later, he came back and he said, since you and I have worked so well over these past few years, how would you like to join my company? I looked at Dr. Bose like he was crazy. And I said, what company? What are you talking about? And it turns out he didn't have a company. He was thinking of forming one.
That started a series of monthly meetings between Professor Lee, myself, my colleague who had become a patent attorney, Mr. Heiken, and Sherwin Greenblatt. We met once a month to decide on what to do to form a company. It was absolutely the blind leading the blind. None of us knew anything about business, finance, and we didn't really care about it.
And so what we came up with was a concept of our two-shift operation. So shift one during the day was to do the government work that we were paid for. And then when the day was over, we would put that aside and we would begin to do audio work at night. We began to develop a product we thought was the ideal loudspeaker. We did sell some, but not many.
It was the summer of '67. He was home alone. He said, we're going to give this one last chance. If we can come up with an idea, we'll stay in the audio business. If we can't come up with an idea, we're going to leave the audio business and we're going to become a power processing company. We didn't hear from him. We didn't see him. Just before we did anything, he came in. He got up and he began to lecture. Then when he was done, nobody could know whether this would work. So we put together the prototype of a 901 as he had outlined it. Looked actually very much like the finished product. We were so nervous because this was go or no go. And so what we said is, well, this prototype looks so ugly. Let's turn the lights off so we're not influenced by it. And sounded magnificent. It was reflected sound. And the thing that Dr. Bose added, which was brilliant, was to turn it around and squirt the sound, most of the sound, directly onto the wall. That was a breakthrough.
But how did it get from 901 to the noise cancelling technology, and from homes to Sistine Chapel or St. Peter's Basilica or even Mecca with pro sound?
One of the things that Bose said is that he really likes teaching at a university, because at a university, good people, really good people come to study, come to learn new things, and come to work together. And he said, that's the kind of company that I want to have.
He had a saying that never tell somebody 4. Always tell them 2 plus 2 and let them figure out 4. Because he knew that when somebody came to a solution themselves, they were really motivated to make it a reality.
Dr. Bose describing to me, saying, we need to think about a general manager as a person who sees our product up on the pole there, installed, and it is just not performing correctly because the angle is incorrect or something. And they find a ladder, pull up their shirt sleeves and climb up and fix it. This speaks to the fundamentals of the company.
Raphael Rafe was a student of Dr. Bose's. He eventually became the president of MIT. He came here for a visit. We did a demonstration. It was the world's first sound bar. Raphael said, Amar, that is just earth-shattering. He said, I've never heard anything like that. And Dr. Bose said to him, you know what the best thing about that technology is? I had nothing to do with it.
Late 60s, my wife and I were having difficulty starting a family. We considered adoption. It's very, very emotional and difficult process to adopt. And it requires references, and they check you out. And when we were approved for adoption, I remember asking the agency, obviously I had given them the names of people who could be references. And I said, so were the references okay? I remember the woman saying, all the references were good. But I have to tell you, there was one that was so extraordinarily supportive and laudatory about you and your wife that it choked us up. I had no doubt that was Amar.
People from the press would ask him, what's your favorite product? And they would think he would say the Wave Radio or the 901. But he said, I don't have a favorite product. And they said, what do you mean? He said, my favorite product has yet to be invented.
If he believed in somebody, he expressed that and he showed it very energetically. If for whatever reason he didn't believe in somebody, or he felt that their values were wrong, he could also be very expressive about that.
Well, what he discovered was that there was a kind of bias against talented women. That infuriated him. I mean, I saw him slam his fist down on his desk and make the papers jump. The way he handled it, completely different. So the whole organization was brought together, hundreds of people. And this was very typical of Dr. Bose, very Eastern as opposed to Western. He would tell stories where people in the audience weren't sure why he was telling them. He told them about his own journey of being discriminated against because of his skin color and his background as an immigrant family from India.
In first grade, I experienced the first time in my life what really prejudice was. And the kids, my parents had always brought me up to the concept of never fight. No matter what happens, you never fight. Well, I would get chased home by gangs in the first and second grade already, hollering nigger, 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 because they knew your father was dark and I was somehow looking different than the rest of the people. And this went on, and then they would beat you up. And I can remember one day coming home crying, all beaten up, and my father was home at the time I arrived home, and he said something to me at that point which made a huge impression, such a big impression that I can remember the pattern on the upholstery of the chair that he was sitting in. And I was crying, and he brought me over to his chair, and he said, one of two things is going to happen to you. He said, one is that you may find that you can't stand this prejudice. And you will hunt for a group that you can join to exert prejudice on some other group, because that will be your escape. The other is that you may come to realize that all of this is so unfounded and absurd that you will realize that it has no meaning or value, and if that happens to you, prejudice will roll off your back like water off a stone. And you will not be able to see differences in people. And then he said, now which will happen to you, I cannot say. That will be up to you. And I was 7 years old at that time, but it made an enormous impression. In other words, if he had said to me, you have to do this or you do that, I don't think it would have had half the impression, but this is what he said. I've always told you that you can never fight under any circumstances. He said, I'm now changing the rules. He said, you will never start, the new rules are, you will never start a fight and you will never lose one. And he then went out and he himself was very physically fit. He came from the jungle area of Jessore, and he bought me a punching bag and taught me how to use it and made sure I practiced every day for an extended period of time. He said that now you take care of yourself, and that solved that problem totally.
While I found some answers, some still remained a mystery. The biggest one being, while Bose is a household name, why doesn't anyone in the United States know that it's a surname, let alone one from Indian origin?
The positive side of the coin does allow for a certain willful erasure of one's ethnic or geographic history. The flip side of the coin, which is negative, is that I think one of the outcomes of the United States culture is a kind of profound ignorance to learn about other places and other cultures.
The general answer is understanding this dual citizenship he had, this dual cultural foundation, to understand where that was for him and what it was. When it came to his Indian origins, his father, Bengali, when it came to anything to do with that, that was so private. Other things were the professional. And as he grew up, it's how he sometimes felt it as a conflict. And that part of him, which guided him, the Indian part, guided him in a lot of his values that he shared with a lot of the Swamis and his father. Because for his father, it was a philosophy. It was not practice. And Amar was intellectual and it was philosophy. For his mother, it was the opposite. It was emotional, but not for Amar. And understanding those two aspects of him is to understand why nobody knows that he's part Indian.
Dr. Bose's mother, Charlotte, was a first grade teacher, but back in 1920s and 30s, women were immediately fired when they got married. So Charlotte had to hide her marriage for years, that too an interracial one. And when she got pregnant, she had to hide her pregnancy as well. And she had to go to great length to hide Amar's existence because her family even disapproved of her interracial marriage. So Amar remained a secret child for the largest part of his childhood. Charlotte was a deeply devoted person who would go to Unitarian church, but eventually she was exposed to the Vedanta Society and she became a very active member of the Vedanta Society in the United States as well as Ramakrishna Mission in India. And the Swamis in Ramakrishna Mission India gave her a name and she was called Sharala, which means a woman of character in Indian languages.
When I was about 9 to 16, there was a Swami from the Ramakrishna Mission, Yateshwarananda, and he was in Philadelphia. And every Sunday, my family would take me to his lectures. I must tell you that my attendance there wasn't exactly voluntary because when you're in that age, the idea of playing on Sunday is much more exciting than to go to a lecture. But today I'm so happy that my parents didn't give me a choice. I would say that it affected my teaching, my ethics in the company, my outlook on life. You don't realize it when you're a child, but things that you hear influence you at that age very strongly, to an extent that you really don't appreciate, I think, until much later.
Thus, Amar would be both an Indian and an American, imbibing the Eastern philosophies and applying them to his Western academic and technological pursuits. He would meditate every night contemplating what he did wrong that day and would plan to be better the next day.
And also, in the office, if he had to go and do a presentation, like in the auditorium in front of a bunch of people, he would take a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes in the office, doors closed, and he would just sit there and just be quiet.
One of a university president's responsibilities is to raise money. And I was cautioned that I did not need to spend any time with Dr. Bose because Dr. Bose was well known not to be philanthropic. And our relationship was built simply on curiosity and shared interests. One evening, he called my office and asked if he could meet me. And then he told me that he had decided to give the Bose Corporation to MIT. It took me a little while to onboard what he had said. And I thanked him, but insufficiently because I was so unprepared. And I then asked him, I said, but you've neglected to tell me something very important. I said, what would you like MIT to do with this truly magnificent gift? And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, whatever you think is best. An incredible expression of confidence in a place he had left because he had lost his confidence. But to have played any role in restoring that great man's confidence in this great institute may have been the most important work of my lifetime.
He passed away in 2013 at the age of 83. He was survived by his wife, Mrs. Ursula Bose, his children, Bhanu and Maya, from his first marriage with Prima Bose. Maya went to MIT and is a doctor of chiropractic in California. His son, Dr. Bhanu Bose, also went to MIT and became an entrepreneur. His efforts helped India's government and telecommunication companies to deploy technology that connected rural India through mobile phone networks at a reasonable cost. Dr. Bhanu Bose died in 2017. 3 generations down the line, the family's name is still very much a part of the Indian, American, as well as the global tapestry of sound. While the legacy of the family remains sometimes visible, sometimes invisible to the public eye, there is a man who exposed the world to good sound and remained in silence.